I'm Jim Collison, live from the Gallup studios in Omaha, Nebraska, as well as the offices in Sydney, Australia. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on August 7th or 8th, 2017. If you have questions during this live webcast, we do have a live chat room that's available for you right below the main video. And if you just look down below video window, bottom left-hand corner, it says log in, choose the guest account, put your name in where it says guest and hit submit. No need to create an account, and you can ask your questions live on the program. If you're listening to the recorded version or have questions about custom strengths coaching solutions, you can contact us, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, or there's a contact form right there on the live page. Ann Lingenfelter is our host today. She works as a learning solutions consultant with Gallup in our Sydney, Australia office. And it was great to see you in person last week at the summit, and welcome to another Call to Coach.
Thanks, Jim. It is always a pleasure to be here. I have to say, it sounds like a commercial break here. I couldn't believe how awesome the summit was. I knew it was going to be wonderful, but it is like this massive master class in all things strengths and how to apply them in different organizations and venues. It was really amazing, and so fantastic to meet so many great people. So if you haven't gone to the summit and you're considering it, pop it in your diary for this time next year, because it was truly tremendous. My guest today is Glenn Williams. He is the founder and CEO of Outward Looking International. Glenn has spent more than 25 years working as a psychologist and executive across 40 countries. That's 40 countries. He is passionate about changing the way leaders think and behave in terms of leadership and performance. After 10 years working in sales for a multinational corporation and with a global NGO, he launched in 2010 his leadership consulting company, which, as I said, is called Outward Looking. Glenn's top 5 are learner, arranger, strategic, achiever, and responsibility. So Glenn, welcome to Call to Coach.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Not many people can say that they have worked across 40 countries. That is absolutely amazing. It's sort of unfair to start off with such a difficult question, but I have to ask you, what are some of your top learnings having done something like that? I mean, what a huge opportunity to be working across so many different borders.
Yeah, actually quite a privilege to travel. I think the biggest privilege is meeting people, different people in their own context. But key learnings, travel light, lower your expectations. I mean that in the sense of just, you really got to take it easy, and, travel is what it is. So things are going to happen at airports and, airline companies, and it just is. So travel light, lower your expectations, get to know people, and really understand their culture and their context. They're the biggest things.
Yeah, it's funny because when I talk to people like yourself who've lived and worked across many countries, I hear one of two things. They either say people are people, no matter where you go. They're very similar, or they say exactly the opposite, which is each place that you go has its own unique culture and characteristics and unwritten rules, and it's so important to learn those as you try to navigate those countries and those cultures. Where do you stand on that spectrum, on that continuum of those two perspectives?
Well, people are people, but I think at the end of the day, we do operate in different cultures. As you've said, we have different priorities, different values, although there are similarities across different cultures. I think the number one thing is when you go into another culture, you're meeting new people, you want to listen. If you go in there with the one who you think you've got all the answers and you think they need to have your approach to life, your perspective, I think that's where you're going to run into trouble. So, trying to just learn as much as you can, which, as you know, comes a little bit easier for me, given that's my number one strength. But it really is learning and listening, and really appreciating and respecting, the uniqueness of each culture.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that. So many of us forget that the listening bit is a key part of communication, right? We just want to talk all the time. So that's great. Outward Looking International. Can you tell me what does that name mean? Why did you choose that for your business?
Well, I'll give you the short version of why I chose that. Probably just over 6 years ago, I was going through my own transition as a global executive. I'd come to the end of a role that I'd made a 3-year commitment to. It was now 7 years, almost 7 years, and was actually finishing up that role. I was looking at my office. I was actually in Colorado. I was living in Colorado at the time, Colorado Springs, looking out at the Rocky Mountains, which is just one of the most beautiful, picturesque scenes you can imagine. And you know, I was thinking, well, listen, if I'm leaving, I need to have a business name. And you know, I love developing people and love developing organizations. And actually, at the time, I was looking out the window, outward, and I thought, well, actually, you know what? Leadership is all about looking outward. It's not just about me. It's actually, but I do need to have a good understanding of who I am first. But leadership is all about looking outward and focusing on others and focusing on how other people can grow and develop and aspire. So it was actually nothing amazing. That was just the picture I had at the time, and it seemed to flow.
Well, before we go into sort of your strengths journey and where that came in, how you learned your strengths and how you're applying them today, I do want to go back a little bit into your resume, because it's quite interesting. This consulting company that you're running today is not your first venture into being an entrepreneur, correct? It sounds to me like you originally worked in sales for an organization, and then tell me a bit about the decision that you made to leave that and start your own business.
Yeah, well, really, you know, I was training to be a psychologist at the same time that I was working in sales for a multinational company, and because of that work, got to meet a lot of people working in the space of family breakdown, families in crisis, young people who had become displaced or were homeless, and that coincided at a time with the Human Rights Commission back in 1989 putting out a report, literally just called the Burdekin Report, which was on the plight of youth homelessness in Australia. And really, I think it was something like 40,000 young people were homeless in Australia. And so at that time, I was thinking, surely something's got to be done. And if people weren't going along to different welfare services, counseling centers, things like that, to change their situation or to be helped or supported, then what strategies could we implement that would help to address that need? And so at the time, I started a company called Profam Consultants, which became Profam Australia, and it was looking at taking different leadership programs, team building programs, understanding personality, understanding who we are in the workplace, knowing that if we could impact people in the workplace to make a more positive difference there and improve themselves, then hopefully they would take that home and have a far greater awareness about how they could build their families and address some of the social issues that were emerging.
That's fantastic. I love this, having read your resume and looked at your website a bit, I love this thread that you have going through all of your workplaces, whether you've been in organizations or working for an NGO or your own business, where being a leader is about not just leading in the workplace, but also in your personal space. And I love that, because I think so many of us, when we think about success, we think it's success at all costs, right? And when I logged onto your website, the first thing that I saw, what's your quote that you have? It's something about success doesn't have to come at the expense of something important to you. Yeah. And I thought, wow, that sounds really good. If you can actually back that up and tell me how you can be successful and make that happen, I think that would be something that all of our audience would love to understand more. Sure. How are you accomplishing that in the work that you're doing now with strengths and otherwise? Sure. Well, you know what, today you often hear people talk about trying to achieve a healthy work-life balance. And, I don't know, I find that word balance to be a little bit ambiguous. I mean, what does that mean? Is that a 50-50? Is it a 70-30? Is it a 60-40? And how do you measure that in relation to different parts of your life, whether that's in your marriages or with your kids as you interact with your children, in the workplace, in other activities that you have outside of the family, in the broader community? How do you work out what's a good balance? And so I really wrestled with that. And so one of the things that we've discovered from our work with leaders, we've come up with this term alignment. And so instead of focusing on balance, how can we actually help a leader live a more aligned life? How do we bring into alignment their goals, their values, their strengths, their passion in such a way where
It's more focused on the totality or the holistic view of their life rather than just one particular realm. And so, if you say to me, what's a healthy work-life balance? Is it 50% at home, 50% at work? I actually don't think that really works terribly well. We all go through different seasons in life. Sometimes we have different priorities. We have different financial goals. We have different needs. And so a 50-50 split is not necessarily something that's going to work. But we all go through those seasons where we can adjust. And so, what goals are important to us? What values are important to us at that particular time? Do we allow our strengths really to play out in such a way where we're giving air, if you like, to everything that's important to us rather than just focusing on success in one area? If I give you a quick example, I was with an executive not that long ago, and I'll just call him Bob. Bob was an entrepreneur. He is an entrepreneur. He's got a fairly high profile, doing very well for himself. In one area of his life, doing very well in business, but he'd gone through two very difficult relationships, two marital breakdowns, having in another relationship, and we got to meet, and in essence, I came away from that, and it's like, well, so we put him up on this pedestal and see that he's really done very well on the business side, but if he was honest with you, he'd sit here and he'd tell you, look, that came at such a huge cost, and I'm not sure that it should have come at that cost. I really let go of some things that were very important to me, and I've paid the price for success in one area. And so that's really an example of how, this with Bob, for example, he gave up something that was very important to him. Was it worth it in order to achieve success in another area? I think Bob would say not.
Yeah. Those are really heavy, real life issues that you're talking about now. How do something like strengths help fix that? How are you bringing that in to something as heavy, as weighty as that? How are strengths coming in and being used in a powerful way?
It's a great question. I think one of the things that we've seen, it's very difficult for some people to focus on their strengths. And I say that because some people have never been encouraged to focus on their strengths. Let me give you an example. Often, when we look at transitions in leadership, particularly people who are transiting from one particular role to another role, we look at the impact of what we call limiting beliefs. It's how they view their strengths. So often they view their strengths through a number of different prisms. What they believe about themselves, what they believe about other people, how they believe other people see them, the impact of their experiences. Sometimes leaders have had incredibly difficult experiences, very negative, potentially very destructive ones that they've never really dealt with and come to terms with. If you look at the culture that a person grows up in, if you look at the impact of family, we've talked about that already, but the impact of family, what are some of the assumptions and beliefs and attitudes and behaviors that you've acquired from childhood all the way through to adulthood? And then you look at culture from the perspective of an organization. Each organization, each company has its own unique culture. And that culture, does it affirm, does it encourage strengths? And so we see all of these areas can deeply impact how a person sees themselves and whether or not, in fact, they're able to see their strengths. And so what we find by working with leaders in that context, this concept of limiting beliefs is something that really plays out. And so we try and address what are some of these limiting beliefs that we need to deal with first before we can actually get on to them having a better understanding of what they're really good at.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of folks I talk to who are working with leaders and within organizations just say that the higher they are, the bigger their job, the harder it is to get them to a place of addressing things like limiting beliefs. And in fact, when you think about the typical truly overwhelmed executive who is just drowning, really feeling stressed and anxious, and their relationships are breaking down and so forth, trying to get them to even agree to doing something like taking part in leadership workshops and addressing these issues, often it goes into the too hard basket, right? Because it's just one more thing that they have to do in a time where they already feel like they're drowning. How have you had success in being able to encourage leaders to make time? And this takes time, doesn't it? It's work. It's not easy. How have you been successful in encouraging them to go on that journey with you?
Yeah, no, and it certainly is a big issue. And one of the ways that we really do that is we've taken the executive coaching framework, LCP, that we've developed over the last 4 or 5 years. We've now seen 430 leaders from 12 different countries go through and coach through that framework. But an important part of that framework is giving leaders access to an online portal. And so they step through an online process. There's 5 different phases in that online process. And what we've found is, rather than leaders go away and say, look, I don't have time for this, what we're finding is leaders instead are embracing this as an opportunity where there's nobody looking over their shoulder. They're doing this in the privacy of their own home or office. It's just them and the computer online, responding to a series of questions that are actually quite deep, some of these questions, and they're asked in a very sequential manner in order to help a leader dig a little bit deeper than he or she would normally. But what we found is doing that in a self-paced manner, doing that without anybody looking over their shoulder, and doing it in a way where they're not hurried, it really just enables them to respond to questions that perhaps for some of them, it'll be the first time that they've actually responded to that question. And then at the end of that online process, and look, we normally say it takes 2 to 3 hours for somebody to go through that entire process. But again, they can go in and out and save their responses as many times as they like. But by the time they get to the end of that, it generates automatically for them an LCP journal. And that journal becomes the foundation, if you like, of the coaching engagement. The beauty of that is they've actually done a whole lot of work before you even initiate the coaching engagement. So, you know, they've sat down, they've thought through the impact of earlier experiences, they've thought about the impact that other leaders have had in their life, and what lessons they've learned from that. They've actually had time to reflect on what do they value the most, what are they most passionate about, what do they think they're good at, what do other people say they're really good at, and then what's the relationship of those things to the goals and the desired outcomes that they have. So by the time they do all this online and they get this report, they get the journal right at the end, they've done all this work before you as the coach even sit down and begin to unpack that with them.
That's interesting. So they're already somewhat invested, aren't they? They've had this they've been doing this work and probably want to see how it's going to end. You know, that's an interesting approach. Typically, we're starting off with a face-to-face, aren't we, rather than the online aspect first up front.
Well, that's true. And the other thing we're seeing, Anne, is because we live in a highly mobile society. You know, when we're coaching leaders, it's not unusual for them to be responsible for more than one business site, if you like, or one office. They're often traveling from one territory to another territory. And so having this face-to-face coaching, you know, in terms of person to person, can be quite challenging and not always practical. And so what we found is, by doing this online first, they get the report. We can actually have a virtual coaching session with them using their own material, so their responses, and have that no matter where they are. We can do that via Skype or Google Hangout or whatever you like. So it also gives us a far greater opportunity to connect at a time that is most practical and most meaningful for them.
So I'm thinking, of course, as you're talking about all the coaches out there who are listening, whether they're internal in organizations or independent coaches, and they're scribbling down notes quickly about, you know, the way other people make it work. And I saw that at the summit too, and people attending these breakout sessions, master classes on different things that people had created, like your LCP. And LCP is Leadership Capacity Program, correct? Have I got that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So as our coaches, our strengths coaches are out there thinking about what their own LCP might be and how they might create it, can you tell us a little bit about, you know, that process for you and
Sure.
where strengths comes into that?
Yeah. So LCP is a framework that leverages strengths. So LCP was based on 2 foundations. One is the appreciative inquiry methodology, which is very aspirational focused. It's not problem-centered. And then also the strength-based approach, so leveraging strengths. And for example, in the 3rd phase online, once they go online, they get to the 3rd phase. One of the things that we don't want to do is we don't want to have to start from scratch with everybody. We don't want anybody entering into that process having to think about, well, I don't really know what I'm good at. And so we encourage people to do Gallup Strengths Finder. We think it's a great, easy tool for them to use. And so when they get to this online phase, they literally identify their top 5. In fact, they can put down their top 10 if you like. But then they can also put down insights from other tools, other assessments, 360s, performance evaluations, and collectively bring all of the insights and highlights from those particular activities that they've done previously, and making it relevant once again to their current context. What we found, Anne, was many of these leaders have done multiple programs over many years. They've just put it aside. It's gone in the dustbin. It's been put in a filing cabinet. They can't find them anymore. And so we just say, look, assemble that all together. We highly recommend get a current look. So use Gallup-Strengths and identify your top 5. That gets integrated into their LCP journal, that then as a coach, you have an opportunity to unpack in relation to their goals. Mm-hmm. And so the strengths-based approach is very important to us in that.
Yeah. So once they have this journal, they've done the online bit, they have their journal. What happens then? It sounds like it's then a series of one-on-one coaching. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we talk about we have a very strong 90-day focus. Now, it's not that we're not interested in coaching contracts for 6 months or 12 months, but we just feel that by having a 90-day focus in our coaching engagement, so that might be 3 or 5 or 6. It depends on what you've really negotiated with the client organization directly. But the focus on 90 days, one, it gives immediate momentum and traction. It establishes a very clear focus on what outcomes are you expecting in 90 days' time. And so in a way, there's no time to waste. And so you've got all of that information. The client has already gone through the entire process online. They've identified their strengths. And now you've got a very clear 90-day focus with very clear outcomes that the client is expecting to see. And so that becomes the starting point of the very first coaching engagement. Yeah. And so in a way, Anne, we're hitting the ground running, rather than 3 months, 6 months down the track, where a client might feel like, well, gee, this is great, I'm enjoying this, but I'm not really seeing any benefit from this.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. An excellent point. All the research that Gallup has done around well-being, and when we've talked about, how do you make changes and how do you encourage people to make changes today for their well-being, a lot of our research has shown that if the goal is too far off, there's no motivation in order to take action. So the fact that you've limited this straight down to 90 days, you can see it at the end in sight. So there's more of a motivation to get straight into it, which is very interesting, because I think some of our coaches might actually see a longer term engagement and a deadline further out as more advantageous. But actually, they may never get to that point if they don't have the success and the results early on. So how do you measure or discuss the impact at that 90-day mark? How do you look at that and say, has this been achieved? Who's weighing in on that, on whether or not it's been achieved?
So there are 2 different perspectives on this, or 2 different angles. One is often the organization may have asked us to come in and to coach the individual client. And so, the chairman or the CEO or another executive may have in mind a very clear outcome that they're expecting from that coaching engagement. And so that obviously needs to be considered as well. The other primary consideration really are the goals and outcomes that have been identified by the individual client who's actually gone through the online process. You heard us mention earlier the importance of alignment, harnessing the power of alignment. Well, equally as important is our ability to align our coaching effort with the effort that the client has made in identifying the goals that are important to him or her. So we look at 3 different sets of goals. We look at their organizational goals. In other words, what is expected of them, what they're hoping to achieve in the next 90 days in order to move their own performance from one particular point to another point, or to a higher level. The second area we look at is their own professional goals, their own development in that space. And then the third one is the personal goals. And you might ask the question, well, why would you include all those 3 areas? We include those 3 areas purely, again, coming back to that comment that you started the whole session with, why is it important that we have to sacrifice something that's really important to us in one area because we want to achieve something really good in another? And so what we say is if you're having to compromise your goals, whether that falls in the personal area of your life or the professional area of your life or the organizational area of your life, then in a way, nobody really wins. You're not getting optimal performance because you're actually having to let go of something that's critical to who you are. And so we do have this focus around organizational, professional, and personal goals. And so that becomes our focus over that next 90 days. And so at the end of the 90-day engagement, and we sit down and we say, okay, based on what you identified as what you wanted to achieve in that 90 days, did we hit that? Now, in some cases, it might be that the roadblock or the challenge that they identified for themselves in achieving that goal, in effect, that might become the 90-day goal. So the goal might be, look, this goal out here might be unachievable, but let's aim to remove the roadblock that's preventing you from achieving that. If that becomes our 90-day goal, is that something that would work for you? So again, there's a lot of personal and professional accountability here between you as the coach and the individual client.
So how many times are you typically coaching them across the 90 days?
Yeah, so once again, it really depends on the need of the client and also their availability. And I think that's an important one, especially when you're dealing with leaders, senior leaders and executives. Availability does become a significant issue. And so what we aim for is we aim to get at least three 90-minute coaching sessions. In some cases, that might be 6 one-hour sessions. It really depends on, again, the practicality of all of that. Another reason for that, though, to be done within that 90-day framework, Anne, is because it really takes minimum of 90 days to affect any attitudinal or behavioral change or mindset change, if that's something that's getting in the way of them achieving the goal.
Yeah. Does your work then can it be taken out to teams, into groups, project teams, and so forth, or is it just predominantly a one-on-one focus?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. In fact, look, often it's individual focused, but not unusual to have a company say, look, we've got an executive team or a leadership team. Could you coach, for example, 6 individuals of that team? And then at the end of that, we have what we call a team alignment report and a process where we actually bring those 6 together and we put side by side what they've identified as being their organizational goals, their perceived roadblocks, and we do a reconciliation with them in that context.
Yeah, interesting. That's interesting. Well, we have a lot of our coaches, when they're looking at the teamwork that they're doing and how it's impacting in the organization, will use Q12. I'm not sure if you're familiar with our Q12 metric, but it's something that we use for measuring impact of coaching initiatives and that sort of thing. Do you have organizations that request data other than just self-reported? This is how I feel that I've progressed on these areas. And if so, what do you do in that space?
Yeah, look, again, important or critical to the coaching relationship, obviously, is the confidentiality. And I think, given the fact that, again, a few minutes ago we talked about these issues go quite deep sometimes. They become incredibly personal, and it's another reason why many don't feel comfortable engaging some of these issues in the workplace. They would rather have an external coach, sitting down and doing this outside of their normal business context. We're very careful in what we share. If we do share any information with, for example, with a supervisor, then, it would be of a de-identified nature, saying, look, there are some broad issues from this team that we've been able to identify that we'd like to relay to you that you could address. On the other side of that, on a one-on-one basis, I think, because we're so focused on the outcomes that they've identified, in many cases, these individuals are comfortable for their supervisors. Again, we're working at this senior leadership level, so most of these are executive senior leaders anyway, so there's probably not much that their supervisor may or may not be aware of. So yes, it's still highly personal, highly confidential. If we do feel it's important to share something that is out of the norm, then we would ask for permission to do that.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Just to switch gears for a little bit, some of the work that you've done has been around an organization that I've just been across enough to know it has does some great work with people who are sort of in that place in life where they're thinking, what's next for me? And that's of course the Halftime organization that you work with globally. Can you talk a little bit about what the organization is and how you're using Gallup Strengths within that context?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Yeah, so Halftime, it's an organization that really works with high capacity leaders who have been very focused, if you like, in the first half of their life on success, but they've reached a particular point in their life where they're saying, well, listen, this has been great. It's been good fun. I've done very well. But is this it? Is this all there is? And often they reach a particular turning point in their life, and they're saying, I really would like to do something different. I'd like to build a legacy or leave a legacy of significance behind. Are there other things I can get involved in where I could actually leverage the experience, leverage the skills, leverage my strengths, leverage what I've learned that can make a bigger difference during the second half of my life? So really, Bob Buford, who started Halftime in the US, Bob would define literally success as being self-focused. It's all about me, whereas significance is being focused on somebody else, focusing on helping others, living a life of significance. I think it was Peter Drucker that said, in a way, we're over-prepared for life one, we're under-prepared for life two. And really, for me, outward looking, my business, it really came out of my Halftime experience. I was in Halftime. I didn't know what I wanted for the next half of my life. And so I had to dig down a little bit deeper and go through a process with other men and women who are in a very similar stage of life, just to explore different opportunities that may be ahead, more consistent with my passion and my strength, and bringing those things into alignment.
Yeah, interesting. So you get guidance then from folks within the Halftime organization about ways, avenues you can explore, whether that's pro bono work that you're doing for individuals or starting your own business, or all of those avenues, correct?
Yeah, all of those avenues. Look, one of the beauties of Halftime, Anne, is when you bring together a group of, let's say, 7 or 8 or 9 like-minded men and women who they're all used to success. They've all done some amazing things. Bringing together to explore what might be next, it creates an amazing energy and an enormous number of possibilities and opportunities. And there's great joy, to be honest, in being able to connect them with different opportunities that you see out there that maybe other people have launched, but they're looking for a particular set of skills or a particular set of strengths that somebody else in that Halftime movement may be able to bring.
Yeah, fantastic. Can you speak a little bit about one success story from one of your Halftime groups? Something that when it comes to your mind straight away, you think, oh, I have to share this one.
Well, there's lots of them, and I knew you were going to put me on the spot for this one, but I think probably one that I'd like to focus on is a fairly senior partner of one of the big four, if you like. Just really coming to the realization that he'd and his wife, that they'd achieved a high level of success and decided that they needed to clear the decks and really clear the decks and focus on what might be next. And so, so it might sound like an unusual success story, this, but literally that's what they've done. They've cleared the decks. They've actually sold the house, downscaled, decluttered in order to position themselves for what might be next, willing to move, willing just to be open to what might be next in order to make a difference. And I got to tell you, on the surface, it looks like a massive risk. You think, really? And if you knew this person, you'd say, but you're so thoughtful and you're so risk adverse and so on. And yet you've just made these massive decisions, but purely to put themselves in a position where they can focus on what might be next. And so that's just one example. I think for me, you come away from that, Anne, very challenged, because I think, we've gone from being very focused on our own careers, on our own success, to really all of a sudden saying, you know what, I can make a massive difference out there if I would only allow myself to be in a place where I could maybe jump or take a risk, work with other like-minded men and women who have got the same desire to build a legacy of significance.
It sounds like a fabulous organization to be part of. I'm wanting to know, how old do you have to be able to qualify, and how successful do you have to be able to qualify?
Well, and I'm 54 years old, so I tell people, look, you don't have to be my age. In fact, we've had as young as 38 I think, go through halftime. We've got an 83-year-old at the moment in one of our executive roundtables. And again, if you were talking to this 83-year-old, it's like, wow, surely you're not in halftime at 83 years old. You know what I mean? But his thing is, but listen, I've lived a very successful life, and I've got these amazing resources, and I feel like he's had some health issues, and there's been significant improvement in those health issues. And it's kind of like, well, listen, I've got this gift. How do I use this gift? I don't want to just close up shop. I actually want to live the rest of my life in such a way where it's a gift that I can keep on giving to other people. So halftime, it's not an age thing. It very much is something that's related to a season in a person's life. Do you have to be incredibly wealthy? No, look, I don't think so. But what we often say to people is, you've got to have a view of success or have lived a life of success from the point of view of whether that's affluence or influence, where you're working in areas and working with other people and networked with other people where you want to actually impact those people to go on and make a big success, live a life of significance as well.
Fantastic. I saw a quote recently on someone's blog, a strengths blog, and it was attributed to Pablo Picasso, and it said, "The purpose of life is to discover your gift, and the meaning of life is to give it away." I hope I'm not butchering that, but that sounds a little bit like what you've just described.
Yeah, no, I think you've done I think it sounds like a great quote. I'll take it.
Hey, can I jump in on this real quick, Ann? Because I've got a question around millennials in this. This speaks, Glenn, this speaks to, I think millennials are doing this earlier and earlier, right? You say it's not an age thing, it's an influence, but and not just, it's funny because I think the millennials and the boomers, and we're all coming to the same conclusion at the same time. We just happen to be a little bit older, and the millennials are a little bit younger. But are you finding, as you're looking at this, that concept, this idea, this self-discovery, and then what am I good at, and then how am I going to make this global impact that's going to change things? Yeah. Are you seeing that happen to younger students? We're seeing this all the time. Or are you seeing that?
Yeah, all the time. In fact, we jokingly say we need a quarter-time product, not a half-time product. Because I think there is generally that sense where, there's a genuine desire for people to want to make an impact. Now, you'll often see millennials, they'll only align themselves or apply for a position somewhere if they see that that's something that's going to line up with a strong sense of purpose or strong sense of calling that they have. And if it doesn't, they would want to make sure that it's something that's going to enable them or equip them to be better resourced to follow what they really want to do. So we are seeing that, Jim. Again, I mentioned the 38-year-old. Really, this 38-year-old came along to the roundtable that we were running and just said, look, I don't want to get to 50 and decide that I want to retire because I've got the resources to retire and play golf. I know I'm only 38 years old. I'm a CFO of a national company. I want to actually make changes in my life right now and pursue a life of significance now so that when I'm 50, it's more of a continuation on from where I'm at right now. And so if my success could be helping other people succeed in life, then I think that's the biggest testimony to the most meaningful thing to him.
Excellent. One of the other bits to your resume and I don't know when you sleep, but is that you are a faculty advisor for doctoral students at George Fox University studying global leadership. When you think about your involvement there, sort of advising academics, do you have any unique lessons or learnings from that space? Because I think I spend a lot of my time working with clients in that space, and I think sometimes it can be a different experience, and there's a different culture in an academic environment. What learnings and lessons do you have to share from that space?
Oh, thank you. Again, initially we began talking about the impact of culture, and yes, it's a privilege to travel from one country to another country, and what are some of the key learnings that come out of that. And I think what I see in advising doctoral students who really are looking at leadership from a range of different cultural contexts is you begin to look at the importance of cultural intelligence. Now, cultural intelligence is really understanding and appreciating and respecting the unique values and cultural elements of where people are growing up, and the impact that has on the way they make decisions, on how they raise their families, on what that means for leadership, what that means, how they define success, different things like this. And so in advising these doctoral students, for example, we for 3 years we do study intensives in different countries. So in fact, in September of this year, we're in Cape Town, South Africa. Last year we were in London and Oxford. The year before we were in Hong Kong. So all with the goal of appreciating different perspectives on leadership across different industries. So that might be just, it might be in a legal context, might be in the financial markets, might be in manufacturing, it might be in the not-for-profit, it might be in a religious faith-based context. All these different views of leadership, but from the perspective of the different culture in which they're currently residing. And I think what it does, it really just expands our worldview, and it helps us to, not take for granted what we have and the uniqueness of our own experience, but to enrich our own experience by learning from what others have experienced in their own unique context.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the presentations that I found very powerful at the summit was on diversity and inclusion. It was talking about how diverse folks are, even within one location of an organization, so one office of an organization. And whilst typically we do think about diversity and differences in culture from one country to the next, which is certainly what you're talking about, it's also interesting to bring it back to the diversity and inclusion that exists within just a small group within an organization, and really understanding that sort of what people see when you walk in the door is a bit about who you are, but it's really what's underneath, and that is where we're really diverse. And it's only through tools like StrengthsFinder that you're able to be able to put a name to the diversity that is sort of the bottom part of the iceberg, right? So we see that your age, and we see your race, and we see your nationality, but it's the other part of what makes you diverse that we see through tools like StrengthsFinder. So it's interesting. I'm sure you bring a lot of that into the learning that you're having there as well.
Yeah, particularly in those cultures and where they're much more risk adverse or problem focused. So rather than focusing on the problem, it's great to be able to use strengths to actually lift their eyes up a little bit and to look at things from a totally different perspective, to look at it from the perspective of, here's what we're really good at, what are some goals that we want to aspire for, that we can achieve, that maybe we've never previously been encouraged to look at because we've always been centered on fixing the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, I when I was looking at your website, I noticed you had a resources section, and you had several different books that you were suggesting that people have a look at based on, I think, the 5 anchors that were part of your program. And I noticed that the 2 Gallup texts that were there were both Tom Rath. One was StrengthsFinder 2.0, and the second one was Tom Rath and Don Clifton's book, How Full Is Your Bucket? And I thought that was interesting that was the other Gallup, because we've got a lot of, Gallup Press has a lot of different fantastic books out there, First Break All the Rules and all of those. So I thought it was interesting that you selected How Full Is Your Bucket as the one that you put on the site for leaders. And so it then made me think, how important is recognition to leaders and in leadership. Can you tell me why you chose that text and specifically and the part that you think that recognition plays?
Yeah, look, I chose that one primarily, Anne, because I think it's not unusual as leaders, because we've been very good at what we've done for a long time. We often go from one position to another position. We get promoted from one to another, to a position that perhaps carries more responsibility. And before we know it, we're doing stuff that we're really good at, but it's not necessarily what we're passionate about. It's not what we've got a heart for. And so if we're not passionate for it, and if we don't have heart for it, we're probably not in a place that's really going to engage other people that we're responsible for leading, because we're not really engaged either. And so for me, I love taking people and using strengths in this. How do your strengths relate, or how can your strengths be activated, if you like, or aimed with your passion, with what actually gets you incredibly excited? If you didn't have to get paid for anything, and what would get you out of bed tomorrow morning? So that's kind of what I'm aiming for. And so for me, how full is your bucket it's almost challenging our mindset a little bit about our approach to life, our view in life. Look, I don't know about you. I've got 3 teenagers, so my 3 teenagers, they got out of bed this morning. None of them wanted to go to school. I know that's not unusual, but because there's that sense of, well, there's nothing exciting about that. But see, they can't see the end game. They don't see that, if I do really well and apply myself here and channel this, into areas that I can be really good at, and into areas where I can make a massive difference, into areas where I'm passionate, then all of a sudden you get a very different look. And so I just wanted, how full is your bucket there, to really encourage leaders to think about, one, how full is their bucket, but what can they do to help fill other people's buckets as well? Those that they're responsible for leading, how can they affirm and encourage?
Fantastic. I have one last question that I want to ask you, and then I'm going to ask you what I've missed and what if the one thing that I didn't ask that you think I should have. But my last question would be, if I am an executive that you're coaching, and I am totally not convinced that aligning my life to my values is going to have a fantastic outcome, meaning I will have greater performance or results or what have you, both in my professional, in my personal life. If I'm so stressed that I can't let go enough of the way I'm doing things today to consider that aligning my life to the values that I say I hold, how would you convince me? What data do you use, or what stories do you use? How do you get through to the executive that's really struggling in that space?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd say, are you happy? Why did you come to us? Why am I coaching you? You've obviously come in from a place of, I'm either not happy with who I am, I'm not happy with my performance. There's something missing in my life. I'm not achieving some of the goals, or I'm only achieving some of my goals, and therefore I'm not happy because I'm not really succeeding in areas that are important to me. It's very easy once you start getting answers to those, that you can see that this person, their life is out of alignment. I'll give you one very real story. Somebody I'm coaching at this very time. He's an executive with another company, and he's got a young child, a two and a half year old, about to have another child in a few weeks' time, and working at this executive role, large company, and this person would work on average 100 hours a week. So let that sink in for a minute. 100 hours a week. So if I said to Jack, and I'll just use the name Jack, if I said, Jack, are you happy? He would say, well, I'm happy, sort of. And I say, well, Jack, if you could change one thing, what would that be? And Jack would say, well, listen, I really would like to be able to have work in such a way where I can have a greater focus and more time with my family, with my young family, and yet still succeed in my workplace. And so what I would ask at that point is, so would you say your life is misaligned? And Jack would say, yeah. And then we would say, I know it's obvious, but tell me how it's misaligned, or tell me how it's out of alignment. And he would have no problems telling me how his life is out of alignment. Now, we don't wave a magic wand and just pretend it's all going to go away. And we sit down and we say, okay, and this is where we look at our 5 leadership anchors. And we say, well, let's take one of these leadership anchors. What are some strategies that you could put in place that would address this, so that this anchor actually literally becomes an anchor in your life? It becomes something firm in your life that's not going to move, irrespective of what trials or what challenges you may be confronting.
Yeah, excellent. That's fantastic. Jim, do we have time for Glenn to say the one thing that I missed, or do we need to wrap it up?
Yeah. No, let's do it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So Anne, really quickly, look, all of this is founded on what we've seen emerge from our work with leaders of 5 leadership anchors. And look, there's a lot of research out there. The very first leadership anchor is leveraging relational currency. We transact in relationships every day. We make withdrawals, we make deposits, we make investments. Some of our relationships are bankrupt. And yet as leaders, we often see relationships, we often see some of this as being the soft stuff, and yet, or soft skills. And yet today, unfortunately, the soft skills have become the hard skills. And this is what we're trying to address. And so, we look at 5 leadership anchors: leveraging relational currency, understanding motivational drivers. What drives people? What motivates people? Do you have a good enough understanding of that as a leader, of what drives your people and motivates them, gets them out of bed? We talk about a leader's value code. What are the values that you just can't avoid, that you can't let go of, that really they're part of your identity, they're part of who you are? How do they play out, and how do you live those out consistently in a way that you can model and inspire those that you lead? The third one is empowering effective decisions. Again, having an understanding of what impacts the way you make decisions and how you implement those decisions. What are some of the assumptions that you make about different situations because of, again, what different beliefs and behaviors that you've acquired over time. And then the final leadership anchor there is transforming goals and outcomes. And so this is all about a leader's trajectory. How do we help you as a leader and your organization that you're responsible for being a leader in set a whole new trajectory, not just for you, not just for the organization, but for the people that you're leading as well. So we have a lot of fun doing this, Anne. It is great fun. And so we make the framework, LCP framework, available to all coaches. And we just ask that they be certified in that and that they leverage a strengths-based approach in that. And I think they'll have great success in using this with leaders.
Great. We hope to see you at the summit next year talking about strengths and the LCP framework. That would be brilliant. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Well, with that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center. Just GallupStrengthsCenter.com. You can send us your questions or comments if you'd like to be a guest blogger and have a strengths-based blog post on our coaches site. We will entertain that as well. You can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this program as well as all the past ones that we have. And we have a whole bunch of them out there, including links to all our social resources and a redesigned resources page out of our coaches blog, just coaching.gallup.com. If you're interested in becoming a Gallup Certified Strengths Coach, you can see a list of all of our courses that lead to certification. And some, we got some brand new courses that are available for you as well on our courses page. Just go to courses.gallup.com. If you found this helpful, and you'd have a hard time not finding this helpful today, we'd ask that you'd share it. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.